Good afternoon. I'd like to acknowledge that the land we're meeting on is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Chung. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm excited to join you today. I lead a unique and incredible team at TD, our diversity sourcing team. We're focused on finding, attracting, and hiring top talent across Canada from our diverse communities. This includes people with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, visible minorities, and a focus on women in leadership headed by your fearless leader and president, and my colleague, the awesome Karen Simpson. My area of focus is the LGBTQ2+ community, and it's a privilege to have a full-time job working with my community and doing what I'm passionate about. Being an Asian woman, born and raised in Jamaica, and someone who identifies as a lesbian, I never take it for granted that I live in an inclusive city and country. And I work for a company that has not only accepted me for who I am, but has embraced me, celebrated me, and provided a platform because of who I am. This month is Pride Month, and I'm always surprised and touched by the number of gay flags that are draped outside of homes as I walk around my neighborhood. Most of them are allies showing their support and celebrating alongside with our community, which makes it all the more powerful. Around my professional networks, I'm known as TD's gay recruiter. Yes, it's really true. And it's something I'm very proud of. But this didn't happen by accident. I was provided this opportunity and I grabbed onto it and I promoted myself as such. None of this would have been possible if I were not out in a big way at work and in life. As a backstory, I'm celebrating my 33rd year at TD this year. But I spent over 20 years of that time hiding my sexuality from most. The intersection of my Asian and Caribbean culture and upbringing provided a foundation of values which were not necessarily gay-friendly. It wasn't until I was invited, or should I say nudged and encouraged, to join and lead TD's LGBTQ2+ employee resource group's focus on women that I eventually felt safe to be my authentic and full self. This was all because of my colleagues' support and TD's inclusive culture. It was at this point that I made a conscious decision to be out to everyone at work and outside of work, and my life changed for the better, both personally and professionally. I'm currently in my dream job, and even better, 3 years ago, I met my partner at TD, and during COVID, we got engaged and are expecting a baby in less than a month. 3 weeks to be exact. I like to call this the ultimate manifestation of goals and dreams, but as we all know, achieving what you want in life is never accidental. The intention has to be there first. This is why I'm so thrilled to kick off this event, because Lean In is a global organization dedicated to helping women achieve their ambitions. Through city networks around the world, like Lean In Toronto, opportunities are created to support each other through Lean In circles, mentoring, and events like the one you're part of today. Lean In Toronto is committed to diversity through everything they do. The intersectionality of women and ensuring all women have support is an important guiding mandate. Thanks so much for joining us over your lunch hour. We encourage you to put your questions into the chat. As always, we always look forward to your feedback on the survey after the event. You can even win the book, Say Less, Get More, for completing the survey. Membership is free and you'll receive a link to join in the chat. Now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Kiki Oyerende, who will introduce our expert speaker for this event on breakthrough conversations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon, for getting us started on this event. It's so excited to be here. And I'm sure everyone's just excited to hear from our speaker. So I will not take too much time. I'll tell you about our event today and introduce our wonderful speaker. who I first met at a Schulich alumni event 2 years ago. And I am honored to be introducing a fellow Schulich alumna for the first time. So our speaker this afternoon has a BSc in French Translation and Linguistics from McMaster University and an MBA in Organizational Behavior and Marketing from the Schulich School of Business. However, her career in negotiations began way before this, right back to her childhood when she was practicing her skills at school fundraisers and after-school jobs. I bet she had a really nice bedtime and was the highest paid child at her summer job. Fotini spent a decade owning and managing small businesses in the retail sector, which she credits for refining her negotiation skills, before moving on to a career in management consulting and subsequently starting her own advisory practice called Forward Focusing. Fotini is passionate about helping people develop their required confidence to take on whatever challenges they face. She's focused on women and disadvantaged communities. In her own words, I help people get what they want. Fotini is a speaker, a trainer, an instructor, an advisor, and most recently, a published author. Her first book, Say Less, Get More, was released in April, and if you have not already read it, please do yourself the greatest favor ever and grab a copy wherever you get your books. She is a global thought leader and media personality with numerous workshops and TV appearances. She has been a guest on a number of podcasts and has been featured on the Globe and Mail. In addition to all of this, Fotini is an MBA sessional instructor on negotiations at the Schulich School of Business at York University. And I promise you, she's one of the best renowned professors, with her classes always fully booked. If you could not already tell, Fotini is a friend of Lean in Canada and very dear to our hearts at the Toronto chapter. She is a purpose-driven woman. When not with clients or students, she looks for ways to offer her experience to meaningful nonprofit initiatives, such as Up With Women, which helps recently homeless women rebuild their careers faster. She also spent her time with the Network of Executive Women to Advance All Women, where she serves as Toronto Region Executive Advisor. She also has her own empowerment camps for girls, with which the focus is to close the gender gap even before it begins. Fotini was named one of the Greek America Foundation's top 40 under 40 and awarded the Network of Executive Women's National Inclusion Award for her efforts. I will no longer stand in the way of your getting what you want, so please join me in welcoming the beautiful and talented negotiator herself, Fotini.
Thank you for that very, very kind introduction. It is indeed true. I have been negotiating since childhood. You just reminded me of all of the fundraisers that I was doing, selling whatever magazines and jams and anything else they put into our hands when I was a kid. It was very important to me to be the top salesperson even back then. And it was my dad who actually nicknamed me the negotiator when I was a kid, because it was something I was doing constantly. And when you grow up with a strict, big, fat Greek dad, you don't have much of a choice. It is the only way to get out of the house. But one of the stories that he loves to tell is that when I was in the first grade, I found a big box of novelty pens in the basement. They had this fun little suction cup thing on the end of it that I thought was pretty cool at the time. So I asked my dad if I could have one. And he said, since they were for a restaurant that no longer existed anymore, they had the name written on the side. He said, yeah, sure, whatever. And I took it to school. And later that day, I came home from school chewing gum. And my dad said to me, where did you get the gum? And I said, from the store next to the school. And he said, how did you pay for it? And I said, with my money. He said, I didn't give you money. Where did you get the money? And I said, I traded it for my pen. You sold my pen? You said you didn't want it. Clearly, from childhood, I was able to spot some pretty valuable opportunities. I turned a pen that was worth nothing into something more valuable to me, like gum. And as an adult, this led to a pattern of negotiating every single salary and job promotion I've ever had, every property purchase, multiple mortgages, cars, not including the ones for friends and family, because I'm like that party trick that they want to bring everywhere, vacation upgrades, home theater systems, you name it. And when I tally up all of those opportunities in my life, according to some studies, I estimate that I have gained a minimum now of 20 years of early retirement. 20 years. And that doesn't even account for the non-cash focused negotiations. It doesn't account for the years worth of stress that I have managed to avoid thanks to using my negotiation skills. And so it pains me to hear women especially say that they avoided negotiating altogether out of fear. Fear of retribution, fear of not being liked, fear of looking stupid or maybe losing the deal. But what if we could just find a way to communicate what we want in order to improve the situation, to have those breakthrough conversations? Now, I know you're probably going to say, oh, sure, you've been doing this all your life, so it's easy for you to say. But one of the first things I tell my MBA students is that negotiators aren't born. It takes effort. Otherwise, signing up for my class would be a total waste of time. And I can't rely on my 6-year-old skills to do what I do today, helping corporations through high stakes negotiation. It takes practice as well as the right mindset. And you've got opportunities to practice all over the place, whether it's closing a lucrative deal, landing a job promotion, or as some of you may know, dealing with an unruly toddler. Negotiations come in all shapes and sizes. And whether you realize it or not, you are always negotiating. And yet, despite being a part of everyday life in business, negotiation can cause distress to so many, but it doesn't have to. After all, a negotiation is simply two people trying to reach an agreement, having a conversation. It's merely a form of communication, or as that one FBI agent puts it, a process of discovery. It's not meant to be a boxing match. It can be rather polite and diplomatic and still be fruitful. Imagine for a second how many years of retirement you're missing out on when you're avoiding some of those breakthrough conversations. Unfortunately, this happens all the time. Every day I see smart, capable people avoiding situations or sabotaging negotiations altogether by saying more than they should, or even losing their composure when faced with potential conflict. And before we get into all of your questions today, I want to share my top 3 tips to help you manage those breakthrough conversations. And the first way to preventing those moments of regret is often simply to stop talking. Find the little pause button in your brain to give yourself a moment. Take a beat, to take a meditative breath. Breathe in for 4, hold for 6, and slowly out for 8. And more importantly, reframe the situation in your mind. Take that moment of pause to reframe things. In a 2013 Harvard study, participants with similar vocal abilities were asked to belt out a tune in front of a group. Now, I am no stranger to a microphone, so I would have a great time in a karaoke room. But I can understand that it is one of the top fears, even bigger than death for most people. So before they were told to get in front of this group, they were asked to say one of 3 things, regardless of how they actually felt. They were told to say either, I am anxious, I am excited, or nothing at all. And according to a computer that measured each singer's volume and pitch, those who were told to describe themselves as excited performed better than the other 2 groups. And remember, they had no greater vocal ability than the others. They even performed better on a math test and a speech test. They were perceived as more persuasive, confident, and persistent. By putting their brains in an opportunity mindset instead of in a fear mindset, they improved their cognitive abilities. And a 2011 study found that anxious negotiators, those who were made to watch the movie Psycho, made deals that were 12% less financially attractive than neutral negotiators. According to this study, feeling or even looking anxious results in suboptimal negotiation outcomes. Of course, those who avoid negotiating altogether get a hell of a lot less than that 12%. So it undeniably shows the need to reframe your anxiety as excitement to achieve all those better results. Find your mental pause button, whatever coping mechanism works for you. It could be that I'm excited moment, or it could be simple as reflecting on the fact that you prepared for this conversation and you know exactly how to handle whatever comes your way. All of that prevents the rambling that could lead you to talking yourself out of a deal. Now, the second tool comes from one of my favorite studies on negotiation, which compared expert to average negotiators. And if you've heard me speak before, you probably heard me reference it. But my favorite piece of the study looked at who asks more questions. I'd like you to tell me in the chat, who do you think asks more questions? Do you think it's the experts or do you think it's the average negotiators? Who asks more questions, the experts or the average? Okay, so you are obviously a very bright group of people because you know that the experts ask far more questions per hour than the average negotiators. Now, if you are somebody who struggles with saying less or silence isn't an option for you, this is a tool that will help you to calm your mind and buy you some of that time to think. In those instances where you are at a loss of what to say or things are getting very heated and it's getting very difficult to control all of those emotions, questions are a great way to manage your discomfort. And when someone tells you no, it is very easy to shut down entirely and get very defensive and start to justify all the reasons why they should be saying yes. And that can get you into trouble. So instead, what you can do is start asking questions about how to work around the no. Instead of taking no for an answer, that's the start of the negotiation. What would happen if you asked, under what conditions would that change? How could we make that work? How close can you get to my proposal? This also helps you to manage the conflict and perceptions of being aggressive versus being assertive, something that my MBA students complain to me about because it's always women who come to see me during my office hours. And one of their fears is the very true reality that some of us are facing discrimination in those difficult conversations. I know from personal experience, as well as from plenty of studies on the subject, that women or less dominant groups, or people with funny names, are facing when they're facing negotiations, they are treated differently, often faced with more aggression and condescension than others. And there's a slippery slope to being called greedy or bitchy or aggressive. And by using questions instead of demands or pointing fingers at somebody, we can avoid some of those awful derogatory labels. So instead of, the client will never go for that, it's, how do you think the client will feel about that initiative? It's not about asking yes or no questions, because that can give the other party an opportunity to shut things down. It's about asking how or what questions to get them to start talking and offer solutions themselves. And these questions are just as useful when I'm babysitting my nieces and godchildren. So, do you want the cauliflower or the broccoli? Whether with children or adults, questions are a way to manage the ego and make the other party feel as though they have some sense of autonomy and are part of the solutions, even though those questions are simply a fact of you driving the conversation where you want it to go. Asking a simple question is far more effective than arguing with somebody or sending them to their room or office. Now, the third way I want to address some of the issues that come up is that in an attempt to avoid some of the uncomfortable situations and aggressive labels that I mentioned, too often one of the worst mistakes that people can make in a negotiation is to give away value for the sake of being liked. So people often try to buy likability in negotiations. It'll often sound like something like, oh, I'll just do this thing that they're asking me for. I'll just give them that extra thing because I just want them to like me. I don't want them to hate me. And I often see that happening in salary negotiations for women. Now, Dr. Robert Cialdini is the godfather of all things persuasion. And one of my favorite studies he talks about explains the principle of likability and getting what you want. And in this study, MBA students from an Ivy League school were put into two separate groups with two different sets of instructions. The first group was told to start negotiating right away, and the other group was told to spend a few minutes getting to know each other. In that first group who got down to business immediately, 55% of them managed to close a deal. That's not too shabby. In the second group who was told to get to know each other a little bit first, 90% of them managed to close a deal. That's 90. And because many of you are probably thinking, oh, sure, they got to know each other and they probably gave them what they wanted, all because they wanted to be liked. Not true. How do I know? That 90% group also managed to close deals that were 12% greater in value. So not only did they close more deals, they closed better deals, all because they spent a few minutes before the negotiation process even started getting to know each other. If that's not the epitome of breakthrough conversations, I don't know what is. Likability doesn't come from giving people everything that they want. So what do? Where does it come from? According to Cialdini, it comes from three things. First, it comes from having something in common, and it can be something quite simple. It could be, hey, you did your MBA at Schulich, I did my MBA at Schulich, or you love wearing the color orange, I love the color orange. The more you have in common, the more likely they're going to want to deal with you. You're building this little bridge between you because you are now more familiar to that other person, and they're going to feel more comfortable and going to want to find ways to deal with you. The second place that likability comes from is from genuine compliments before the business begins. And I say genuine because we can smell a rat. If you showed up here today with bedhead and I started complimenting you on your hair, you'd be going, what do you want from me, Fotini? And finally, the last place that likability comes from is from cooperative people. And if you are doing all of the things that I've already been talking about in the last few minutes, if you are pausing to think about this as a process of discovery and reframing the situation, and if you are pausing to ask great questions to make them feel they are part of the solution instead of having it forced down their throats, you are demonstrating cooperative behavior, and you are saying less and getting more. More likability and more value in your negotiations, from early retirement to better relationships. So by saying less and getting more, you can get 12% better deals, and you can manage that bully that keeps pressing your buttons. You too are going to be able to acquire more wealth, retire earlier, reduce stress, and build better relationships. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Karen because I believe she's got a whole whack of questions that came in from you that we're going to address today with the remainder of our time.
What a pleasure, Fotini, and thank you for the impact that you've had on me and women. I am Karen Simpson, and I am the very proud leader of the team that put this event together today, and excited to walk through a whole series of questions. Ask the expert is the approach we decided today, and we had the most exceptional engagement by everybody in the registration questions. There were at least 400 questions that came in. So as much as possible, we've been able to categorize that a little bit, but it will definitely give you a temperature for what's going on in the economy right now. Fotini, the first time that I saw you in action was at the Spoke Club, September 2017. I did look back through our social media, been following you since then. And I have to say, thank you for the impact that you've not only had on me, but you've had on other women. When you think that my job is to advocate and to help other women get what they want, and the impact that just one person going to hear you speak has had on literally hundreds and hundreds of women that I've helped place into roles and coached. There's a great awesome that comes from that. I'm super proud of this book. I would love to see everybody on here today buy it, add it to your summer reading. This is a read and reread book. No one becomes an expert at negotiation. I know that Fotini is, but it takes 10,000 hours to become a master at a skill. Fotini is that expert, so we can count on her to help bring that. This is a conversation that doesn't ever end. And there's always going to be changing things. Like, for example, in our economy right now, why did we decide to call this Breakthrough Conversations instead of Negotiation Skills Expertise event? Very specific reasons for that. When you say negotiation, there's oftentimes you're thinking, okay, this is about money. This is not just a conversation about money, as Fotini's nicely pointed out already. This is a conversation about quality of life. This is a conversation about advocating for yourself. And for women, I think it is overcoming our fears around having those conversations. And if we can impact anything today with dozens of you, that will be the gift that is going to keep on giving, because you're going to role model that through your teams and through your children and through other women. So let's start this conversation. And I want to actually hit it on the head right out of the gate. You've kind of alluded to this a little bit already, Fotini, but let's talk about the difference between how women and men negotiate. I have a stat here that men initiate negotiations about 4 times as often as women. So in addition to what you've already alluded to, can you give us some advice about how we can kind of change this reality? I like stats and numbers because it's sometimes a hit on the head that I might need to change myself. But what would your recommendations be around women, encouraging women to do it all the time?
Yeah, I think I've been looking at stats like this for so many years because I never understood why women, and I speak to general audiences. I have a passion for helping women especially, but I speak to general audiences all the time. And it was always the women who were pulling me aside going, how did you do that? Or what gave you the courage to do that? And it was women coming to my office hours. I never once had a man come see me during my office hours in 5 years of teaching at an MBA level. That's crazy to me. But it was always the women going, are you sure I can do this? It's almost like they were looking for permission from me. I do think that trend is changing. I think women are recognizing that they are clearly allowed to advocate for themselves, but we're still facing the reality that we are going to be treated differently than men are. And I think it comes back to one of those perceptions that we talked about and that I mentioned at the beginning of this, is that the perception is, oh, it's going to be this awful boxing match. And men aren't shying away from that. They're not worried about confrontation. Women are, because either they don't like it or they're worried they're going to be punished for it. And what I want to take away is some of that worry altogether. It doesn't have to be confrontational. And so I'm not shocked to hear that men are 4 times more likely to step up to the plate and do the negotiation itself. I'm also not surprised when I hear that they're usually more successful at it. One of the things that I've heard, even I think it may have even been in Sheryl Sandberg's book, but when there's plenty of studies on the subject that say men are overconfident and women are underconfident. I think we're correcting that underconfidence, but I still think we have a ways to go. So if a woman sees, for example, a job description that has 10 things on it, she's going to go, oh, I'm going to wait till I have 12. And a man sees that same list and he goes, 2, I got this. I'm all for it. I have no problem putting myself forward. We have to get ourselves into that same mindset. I will tell you, I've had a really cool career. I've had an interesting career. I've never been qualified for any of the jobs that came my way. If I was fully qualified, if I had fulfilled that list, they wouldn't have been able to afford me in those positions. So I've learned on the job. I've made them hire me on my potential and my capabilities as opposed to being the finished product. And I get really upset when I hear women say, I'm not ready yet. Well, there's never really a great time to be ready. There are things you can do to help prepare yourself for that moment to say, I'm not ready to take on a team. I'm not ready to take on that much more responsibility. Well, do what you can to get yourself ready, because a lot of this stuff comes from learning on the job. And when it comes to the negotiation process itself, it's taking that mindset and going, oh, it doesn't have to be combative. I can ask questions and make it much more cooperative to make it feel like a conversation instead of, this moment in time where someone has to walk away bloodied and bruised. I can think about likability and making things more cooperative by breaking the ice with somebody. There are some ways that I can get them to like me, to make them want to deal with me instead of others. I will tell you, my entire business exists because I quit a job that wasn't serving me anymore. I had no intention of starting my own consulting business, 0. I never wanted to be self-employed again after having grown up in self-employment. But it was my clients who said to me, we want to deal with you. When are you going to come back and help us out? And I said, I don't work for that company anymore. They said, we didn't hire the company. We hired Fotini. They didn't hire me back because I was giving them massive discounts. I knew what they were paying before. So why would I be giving them discounts? And they didn't hire me back because I was boasting about all of my accomplishments and puffing out my chest. They hired me back because they enjoyed working with me, because I was listening to them, because I was bringing value to the equation. And I wasn't shameful about helping to articulate how I could help them create some value. So there is that opportunity that we can take in terms of mindset to press that pause button and go, oh, this can be a conversation. This doesn't have to be a combative thing. Oh, you know what? I fulfilled this many and I do it this well. And here's the potential I have to fulfill the other, X number of things on this list. And I can speak to my past experience and how that's going to help launch me forward in this experience as well. So I think reframing is one of the biggest things that's going to help be a catalyst to push women forward. I am extremely optimistic about what I'm seeing in terms of trends and changes, especially with younger women under 30. But I'm still seeing a lot of people struggling. I just think as we watch these numbers, those numbers of women who are standing back and not putting themselves forward is going to shrink, but we have a lot more work to do to make sure it shrinks a lot faster in our lifetime.
Definitely. One of the questions we asked in registration was, have you negotiated in the last 6 months? And I'm very sad to say that 2/3 said no. And then of the ones that said yes, a very large percent of them said yes, but they got to know. So I kind of want to hit this on the head with, okay, so we all should be negotiating. There is statistics around, start negotiating from your very first job. It can make a difference of $500,000 throughout your career. You add town pending and interest and all of that gain that comes from that. So what would the steps be, Fotini, for everyone here going forward and asking for a raise or a promotion within the next couple of months?
So my advice on this one, I feel like I'm a broken record on this one, is I want you to start early. Don't go in like a cold shower. It's going to be really uncomfortable for you, and it's going to make it much more difficult for them as well. But what can you do now to start planting the seeds? So when you do make that ask, when you do finally go in there, it's going to be very logical for them. Of course, this is a person who for the last few months has done X and Y and Z and all of these really cool things. Yeah, it's no shock to me that she was going to come in and ask for more. In fact, I've had her on my mind for this because of this recency effect of these great wins that she's been celebrating with me. So I want you to think about that in advance, because too often what I find is, let's say that your end of year evaluation is in December. And that is the meeting where they tell you how you've done and what your new goals and metrics are going forward. And then they go, congratulations, you got a 2% inflation raise or something to that effect. What happens before that is somebody a month before, maybe even 2 months before, sat in a room with a bunch of other executives and advocated on your behalf or didn't advocate on your behalf. So that negotiation actually started before you had that conversation with your manager in that December meeting. So that negotiation started months before. That means you have to be a bug in the ear of that person months before when they're about to go in for that meeting to talk about and celebrate and champion you at that table. That means you have to have started, let's say if that was December, maybe in October they're in that boardroom. I want you by August to be thinking about, how can I set up a one-on-one chat with my manager to go, hey, I just want to do a check-in. I want to talk about some of the things that I've been doing. I want to make sure I'm on track for all of these things. And that's really just an excuse for you to sing your own praises and do this check-in, to do this barometer of, how do you think I'm doing? What else can I be doing to make sure that I am achieving all of these things that we set out to achieve together, or that I am excelling beyond my job description? Those are it's asking those questions and doing it in a cooperative manner and making it seem like it's this productive conversation between you, where you are planting the seeds, you are in charge of that conversation, so that when it does come up, maybe it's at the end of that meeting, maybe it's in a follow-up meeting where you go, hey, I'm on track to do all of these things that we talked about and more. I'm really thrilled and I appreciate your guidance on this. What can we do to make sure I get that promotion at the end of the year or in this next stage or whatever that looks like? What can we do to make sure that I am competitive with other people on the market and that I'm focused on staying here and being on my most productive? By asking those questions as well, in that form of what can we do, make it into a team initiative instead of going, you need to do this. That's not going to go over very well. Or you must do this for me and I'm demanding that. That's also not going to go over very well. But by asking those questions of what can we do to achieve this common why? I talk about why being the bullseye based on Simon Sinek's golden circle example. He's the one that talks about starting with why. Think about what's in it for them. What's in it for them if you get promoted? They're probably going to look really good. They're probably going to have a long-term productive employee. You're probably going to be more motivated and be able to rub off on others and create more productivity and so on. You're going to be a role model in your group. You're going to be a mentor for others. All of those things serve that person or the organization. So think about those things and go, how can we make sure that I am doing this? These productivity initiatives, this mentorship, that I feel like a leader in this position, that I'm equipped to be a leader and take some of that stuff off your plate, that I'm doing these things in a more efficient in a more efficient way to manage some of your time as well. When you can think of some of those things from their perspective, treat it like this conversation of cooperativeness, then you're going to be poised to knock it out of the park because you've been planting the seeds. You've been doing the cooperative stuff. You've been thinking about timing in advance, and you're not waiting until the last minute to try and claw back an extra 0.5% of inflation rates. So I'd say taking all of those things into account, map it out like a strategy instead of a one-off conversation to start with, and then think of when those conversations happen, how am I going to be more cooperative? How am I going to use those questions that I've been talking about so much? How am I going to make sure that I'm showing them that there's value in this for them as well? And then they're going to want to find ways to engage with me. And I think that's going to help you really map out a strategy that's going to make it difficult for them to say no, or at the very least, they're going to have to give you a roadmap on how to get there. If they can't give it to you today, then you're going to be able to ask the question, okay, if not today, when? What do you need to see from me? What milestones do we need to hit? Make sure you have that roadmap mapped out before you leave that conversation if you're not going to get that raise or that promotion today.
Definitely. And I have to say, working for a large corporation, waiting till year end to have that open up that conversation is not the strategy you need to take. You need to have it at mid-year or during one of your earlier conversations around career development regarding promotion and salary, because the budget process for the larger the corporation, the longer the lead time on those conversations, and you need to get your desires into that conversation very quickly. The other thing that companies recognize, and there's a lot of statistical research out there to support this, 40% of us right now are looking to make a change in our jobs. We are looking outside of our current organization. Companies know that this is going on right now. They want to keep their top talent. If there's any motivation for you to go and get for what you have, and it doesn't mean it's just going to be money. It could be about working from home. It could be about doing some training. So while yes, we want to elevate women's income and security, 100%, we do. There are other ways that you can also target that negotiation to come out with some pretty big wins. That might actually be a little bit more important to you at times, at this time, particularly in your life.
It's funny, I think back to a conversation I had with a former manager, and he said to me, you know, when I interviewed you, I felt like you were interviewing me more than I was interviewing you. And he framed it as a good thing, because I was asking questions like, what are you doing to invest in your employees to make sure I feel like this is a place where I can make the right move to stay a long time? That was music to his ears. For him to hear, you want to stay a long time? I'm not going to be dealing with turnover and having to go through this process and waste a lot of time here. Let's talk about how we can figure out a long-term solution for you. So asking questions can get you quite far in mapping out some of those opportunities that you just referenced as well.
Yeah, and we have a lot of women entrepreneurs like yourself, Fotini, and there were a lot of questions about how to approach increasing rates on consultancy work. What would your suggestion be and approach recommendations around that?
So it's a tough one, because you really need to, in any negotiation, but particularly when you're quoting something, when you're making a proposal, whether it is you offering a consulting rate or a service rate of some kind for what you do, or even a product rate if you have a widget that you're selling, or you're making a proposal around a salary that you're going after, you need to make sure that you are well versed in what the competition is doing. What is the landscape out there? In negotiation speak, we talk a lot about BATNAs, which is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Everybody in a negotiation is going to know, what's my alternative? If I'm not going to go with Fotini as a negotiation advisor, who else am I going to talk to? People know that before they go into this negotiation. They're not waiting until the last second to figure that out. So if they've done their homework and they know, there's Bob and Jim and all of these other people who are offering services similar to hers, then I need to make sure I understand what are Bob and Jim and all those other people doing. Now, then I can start to formulate, how am I differentiated from that? What is it that I'm bringing to the table that they're not? And that's part of your sales pitch, but that tail end of the sales pitch is the beginning of your negotiation process as well. So if you've poised yourself to differentiate yourself from the pack, you still need to know, what is the pack selling? And I will tell you, I am more expensive than some of my peers. And that's totally okay, because I bring something unique to the table. Some of my peers are only academic. Some of my peers are only practitioners. I'm one of the few people out there who has a blend of both. You're going to pay a premium for that. So I'm not shy about talking about some of those things. So I know that I'm not way off base when I'm asking for some of this stuff. So if, for example, you're asking for a salary or retainer or something like that of $100,000, if you've done your homework and you know that everybody else is offering 50, they might go, I don't think there's any differentiating factors to make me double this kind of thing. The same way, if you're going in and asking for a salary of 200,000 to finish at 100,000, you might seem like you're off your rocker and I'm not even going to have a conversation with you. But knowing that the competitive rates are somewhere around 112,000 to 115,000, then you can very credibly go in there and say, well, based on what the competition is offering and how much more premium I am or the additional services that I bring, here is what my offering is. So you want to sound as credible as possible. You don't need to quote what the other guys are doing or the other guys are paying. In fact, that's going too far. Their stuff is like soap in your mouth. Don't talk about the competition, but talk about the fact that you know the landscape and that you are well versed in the landscape and that you offer above and beyond what the landscape offers, and your pricing reflects that as well. When you're having that conversation, anticipate that they're going to try and negotiate with you as well. So you may want to start a little bit higher than where you expect to finish. Even in a salary negotiation, you can expect there's a tiny bit of wiggle room, not a lot the way there used to be in the past, thanks to transparency and so on. That wiggle room is getting smaller, but people are conditioned to do this dance of negotiation. So expect to give them what they feel like is going to be a win. Maybe it is doing one more service on top of that thing. Well, if you can sign the contract today, then I can throw in this extra review or summary of our time together, or I can give you this 1 hour of editing copy or whatever that looks like. But hold a little something back so you have some room to give them that satisfaction to close the deal at the end as well.
Awesome advice. And if you have built a business around your expertise, you are an expert. So doing the research, you would have lots of contacts to make sure you've got that information going out of that conversation. If you put your hand up in the chat because you have a question you would like to ask and you're okay being on screen, the Lean in Toronto team can vet that. I'm going to ask a question now that Sophia has put forward in the chat, and she wants to know the role that emotions play in the negotiation and what your recommendations would be around not taking it personally, not having that show through the process.
So emotions drive so much of what we do, especially when it comes to difficult conversation. It's the reason that I came up with the pause button in the first place. Like, the pause button originated because I was working with a client down in Bentonville, Arkansas, where they were negotiating with Walmart every day. And this one woman in particular was so talented and so bright and so good at her job. She was in supply chain at the time. And she was so articulate when she was talking to me. And then when she'd get on the phone with the customer, it was like her mind would go blank, or she would start to stammer, or just all rational thought would kind of leave her brain. And I said to her, you just need to slow down. You just need to take a minute to pause. And I literally Googled the word pause in an image, and I found a pause button and I printed it out and I stuck it on her bulletin board. And so that was her reminder every time she got on the phone to just take a breath and calm down. There are ways where you can actually allow more rational thought to enter your brain. I referenced it earlier. It's the first thing I talk about because it is so unbelievably important. When you allow your, what we call our cave person brain to come into play, we are triggered by things that will get the adrenaline flowing. In our cave person ancestors, it was saber-toothed tigers and things like that. And that's what got your heart pumping and your palms sweaty and all those things. Today, we don't have physical threats. We have intellectual threats though. And they operate the same way. Our physiology operates the same way. So if you can now take that and go, okay, I am, instead of anxious, instead of scared, I am excited. I finally get to show them what I'm made of. I'm finally able to put all of this preparation into action. Your heart rate is not going to go any lower. Your breathing might not get any more shallow, but you're going to channel that mental energy into something that's more productive versus something that's going to be holding you back. And if you can almost take yourself out of the situation for a moment, if you can press pause and go, if I was staring at this from the balcony looking down, how would this look to me? You know, this happened to me once where I talk about it in the book in the epilogue. I had this moment where I was having an awful negotiation with a former manager, and I was doing everything by the book. I'd become an expert in negotiation. I'd read a million books on the subject, and I was doing everything that I'd been advised to do by other mentors in the past and so on, and he was still being a jerk. And I had this moment where I just paused and I went, I'm not going to get baited into this. I'm not going to give him an excuse to call me emotional. I am not going to give this person the satisfaction of knowing that he's pushed my buttons. That doesn't mean I go cold. That doesn't mean that I go stoic, because too often we're given the advice of don't show any emotion. I think emotion's a great thing if you channel it effectively. People tell me all the time I'm really passionate, and that jumps through the screen, even when I'm doing TV appearances. I'm thrilled. If I was emotionless, if I was stoic, no one would buy my book. But I know that it comes across. And I once had a boss that called me emotional, and I told him, that's great. I'm glad you recognize my passion. It's my passion that gets shit done. And I reframed that situation right then and there. I found my mental pause button. One of the ways I was able to do that is because I saw it coming. I knew this was somebody who pushed my buttons. I knew this was somebody who could act like a jerk, who was a misogynist, who had a history of saying these stupid things. And because I knew that, it wasn't a shock to my system. I wasn't having that cave person moment. I was able to spot it for what it was because I had mentally prepared for it. And I could reframe it and go, this is my moment to go, you know what? I'm sticking to the script. This is exactly what I've anticipated, and I know exactly how to handle this moment. And no matter what you say and do, I'm not going to lose my cool to the extent that I would have. It's really hard to stay under control. I'm not perfect, and I don't expect you to be. But boy, did that make a difference in terms of how much my emotions got the best of me. When you can kind of pause for a moment and watch it, almost like you're watching it on TV, you'd be amazed at how you can reframe that situation and go, I see you for what you are. I see this for what it is, and I know exactly how to handle this right now. I will tell you that situation didn't end well for me. It didn't end well in the sense that I didn't get what I wanted. I knew I was being paid less than my peers. I addressed it. I handled it textbook perfect. And anybody I dissected it with later told me the same, and I know a lot of professional negotiators, but it got me something amazing. It validated something I already knew. It validated that that was not the place for me. And because I handled myself with poise, because I didn't get as flustered as I would have if I just allowed myself to react to this person the way my Mediterranean blood tells me I should, because I managed to channel that energy into something more productive, like I'm excited to show this person what I'm made of, instead of I wonder if he's going to push my buttons today. I managed to get my confirmation and my validation that despite my best efforts and the best efforts of any negotiator, I'm not going to change this person. And therefore, I have confirmation without regret that this is no longer a place for me. I wouldn't have been able to walk away without regrets if my emotions had gotten the best of me. I want them to be there, but I want to channel them and use them for how I want to use them instead of having them abuse me in that moment. And if I had started yelling at him, which was my temptation in that moment, I probably would have had regrets and probably would have blamed myself for how badly things went. But this time it was very easy to blame him because he was the one that was getting all emotional. And I said to him, you know what? I came in here to speak to you like an adult. And it seems like you're the one, I'm the Mediterranean one whose hands should be flying everywhere. But it seems to me that you're not ready to have an adult to adult conversation. So when you are, I'm happy to pick this up. In the meantime, I think we should take a break. And I felt like a superhero when I walked out of that meeting because I could do that, because I could take my mental energy and focus on what he was doing instead of what it was doing to me. And it takes practice, whether it's meditation, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's like role playing out this stuff in your brain and going, what else could he say to me? What else could he do to me? And being prepared for that moment. I think we are far more prepared than we realize. It just takes that moment of reflection and that reframing moment to help you with that. So I don't say ignore your emotions. I'd say channel your emotions, reframe that anxiety into excitement. And there's a really great book I recommend on the subject called The Upside of Stress by a woman named Dr. Kelly McGonigal. She also has a great TED Talk on the subject. So if you want a 20-minute version, there you go. But I love the book for exactly what it helps me to do in terms of reframing.
Awesome. And when we talk about emotional negotiations and we're talking about offices in the home and getting space and the privacy for that, childcare division, home life reality division. I mean, this book can definitely help at work and at home. And I think quite honestly, in all of our relationships, that is a component of it. Some of the questions I'm having, unfortunately, are around negotiating with women and the perception that has a difficult context to it based on what the woman you're just negotiating with might have perceptually around that process. Any words of advice around that?
So all of the science or the data that I've seen around women in negotiation is that women are treated poorly in negotiation by both women and men. So even when it's woman on woman negotiation, there is a connotation of, I don't know, maybe our brains go back to the subconscious 1960s where you should be grateful to be out of the kitchen. I'm not sure what drives it, but unfortunately we are treated poorly by women in negotiation just as much as we are treated by men. And so I would say for that, there definitely is there's value in having that awareness, but there's almost a danger of worrying about it too much. I would say focus more on that likability factor. It's a double-edged sword when it comes to negotiation. I talk about it so much for women specifically because I think it's that much more important to really get that stickiness of likability before the negotiation begins. We are more willing to forgive men for arrogant behavior than we are women. And you may not realize that you are being perceived as arrogant. You may be doing nothing to justify being perceived as arrogant. And yet for some reason, that is the lens that some people see women negotiators performing as. So I'd say for women and men, it's almost like, if you can imagine the balance beam for gymnastics. So women have this teeny skinny balance beam where we have to be really careful to make sure that we're likable and cooperative and all those things. And the male balance beam is like this, and they get to just stroll down without having to worry about teeter-tottering quite so much. So if you can work the likability factor, it's almost like you're widening the beam a little bit. You're given more room for error. If you can find those things in common, if you can ask really great questions, it won't feel very combative. It will help to disarm people, because if they're going in going, why is this woman asking me for more sex? She's a woman, she should be grateful for what she has. And I'm not suggesting that's what's going through their brains, but at a subconscious level, we do have some element of bias that still exists, some residual bias. If that's what's going on, you can mute that by building up that likability factor, by finding ways where they're going to want to go, I like dealing with this person. I want to find a way to make this person happy and satisfied. So find those things in common, pay those genuine compliments, ask those cooperative questions, and you're going to mitigate some of that effect. Worry less about how this woman's going to treat me, worry more about how am I going to focus on who is this person and how am I going to get the likability factor in that. I don't want you to be paralyzed by the fear that you're going to be treated differently by a woman. The reality is you're going to be treated differently by both genders. So it doesn't really matter. What matters is how am I going to win this person over? And I say likability, and I want to be really careful. Likability doesn't mean I'm going to have a close relationship with every single person I negotiate with, and I'm going to plan our next vacation together and girls' night out. And that's not it. Likability can be a spectrum. You can have just enough likability to get through this meeting, and you can have a ton more likability to get through 10 more meetings with this person. So don't get overly concerned about going, I must be their most favorite person in the world, because that's not what I'm talking about when it comes to likability. In the study I referenced, it was very short negotiation, 12% better results, 90% of them getting to deals, all in 2 minutes. So you can do a lot with just, breaking the ice and starting that conversation on the right footing.
And I do strongly believe that negotiating builds respect for yourself and for you on the other side of the table. And being in sales for so many years, whenever I got pushback from men in that tech environment to myself as a woman who was always negotiating, I would put out, well, I don't think that you would be happy if I didn't go out and negotiate on behalf of your company when we're working out deals and we're talking about candidate salaries, and because that always affected the fees that we might get. So I would learn ways through those years to push back on it. And one of the quotes that you have that I love is, and I'm not saying this as a quote, but is, no is the beginning of the negotiation process. And I think for us, learning that, okay, so you're going to go in, you're going to ask for it, and what if you get a no? Like, that is the beginning of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. If you could round out that conversation a little bit more.
Yeah, it's about planning for the no, knowing it's going to come. So what are you going to say when, not if? And that again can help to reframe your brain, prepare you for whatever's coming your way.
And don't expect that we're going to be experts on it either. Like, we have to go through that journey and not be so hard or perfectionist mentality about how we're going with that. We're coming up to the end of the event. I'm so thankful Fotini's had this conversation. As I said earlier, this is not the end of the conversation. This is the beginning of that conversation. We will continue it through our social media at Lean in Toronto and at Fotini Icon. We're going to end the event today. We're going to be having a conversation about this and other things going forward into the fall. I hope everybody has a wonderful summer. Lean in Circles is a way that you can build your leadership skill set, as well as bring together and network with other women, small groups of women. We're going to show a video to end out this event today. And please go ahead and do the survey when it comes out in the next day or so. There's an opportunity for you to win one of several of Fotini's books. Have a great summer, everybody.
Hi, I'm Sheryl Sandberg, and I'm excited to invite you to join a Lean In Circle. Lean In Circles are small peer groups that allow you to learn and share in an atmosphere of confidentiality and trust. There's lots of evidence from book clubs to weight loss groups to team projects that we all achieve more in groups than we do as individuals. That's why we're forming Lean In Circles, and we invite you to form one or join one. They're groups of 8 to 12 peers that agree to meet together once a month, both to focus on sharing and focus on education. Working with experts from around the world, including the Clayman Institute on Gender Research at Stanford, will give you education modules. You can learn how to negotiate, how to communicate, how to navigate your career. And we'll also support you as you share experiences with each other, supporting each other. As a group, you lean in. I'm excited to have you join a Lean In Circle as we all lean in together.